Hey everybody, Big Toad here and welcome to my studio. Today we're going to do an exercise, a contrast and value exercise. Not really a painting that's going to have, any value as far as putting on your wall, but one of the things as painters we have to worry about is this contrast and values. And I think this is a great exercise just to get you in the mindset and to help you think about um, contrast and value. And that is, how do we paint a deep, dark forest when there's not really anything but foliage around? And I stuck a little trail in and a couple tree trunks and a fallen log just to add some details to work around. But that can be a very hard thing. And so this is purely an exercise in contrast and value. And I think painters should do this kind of thing. And I think one of the hardest things to do is just take a solid green photo and turn it into something where you can see contrast. So I don't expect much from this painting. So what I did, I put this grayish blue for the sky, and I mixed that with terp substitute so it would dry quick, so I could paint all over it. Now I'm going to lighten it up a little bit. Again, it's not as important what color as it is the value I'm putting on. Promise I'm going to put a little trail in this painting, and I'm just going to block it in with this kind of brownish, greenish, yellow ochre type color that's been muted and grayed down. Just for the block in, I added some darks with that same color. Put in the bottom right a dark bushy area and a little dark on the left side as well. And I put that log in and I'm filling that in with a darker green. I mixed up a bunch of greens for this. And now I'm going to start blocking in some green colors to represent the different types of bushes and foliage and leaves and moss. At this point, I'm thinking a little bit about values and contrast. Contrast, of course, so I can see the different types of shapes I'm going to put in there. Right now I'm putting in some tree trunks, and I put in some more foliage with different contrasting or values of greens. And again, that is to create separation at this point. The values haven't been set to my final values, but I needed to come up with values to break it apart so I can work from there. Again, I blocked in with some various greens. Now I'm putting some really nice darks in there using this dark brown to hold the real dark pattern. And I'm going to use pretty dark colors when I get down to the bottom as well of this painting. But I realized I needed to show my darks a little better than what I had. And so now I'm going to repaint over the dark areas with this same dark brown. Eventually I am going to go darker, but this just holds the spot for me. Again, I'm not focused on value. I'm focused on some value here, really, but I'm mostly focused on contrast so that I can see the different types of areas of the painting and where I want the different types of foliage. Now I'm starting to think about the real values. And so I've gone in with a somewhat muted, that means grayed down brown. I don't want to use, again, I just want to explain color. The color out of the tube is not what you want to paint the majority of your painting with right out of the tube. And here's the reason why. The colors out of the tubes represent the brightest color, the richest, the one with the highest value. And so if you start right with the highest value, then you cannot create the contrast you're after. So I always recommend you mute those colors, gray them down, and you can always bring the value up higher. But usually you're going to want to gray those down, and how much you gray it down is really a matter of taste to your painting style, also a matter of the lighting that you're trying to capture in your painting. But again, if you're going to use color right out of the tube, wait to the end of your painting when you want to bring in those special highlights. Otherwise, just get in the habit of always graying out, neutralizing somewhat your colors. Because again, the brightest color you're going to get is right out of the tube. Anything beyond that's just going to get duller. So dull right off the bat, because you're going to want it. You're going to want to bring high. You're going to want to save the brightest colors to last. So with the trees kind of blocked in with that darker brown, that base brown I'm going to use, I need to bring in some darks. So this dark is made from burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. It's a great dark color to bring in and create shadows. So I'm going to go around and put my darkest darks in using this color now. With my darkest darks in, I can start in with a dark green. It's value-wise, it's not quite as dark as my darkest darks, but it's still a very dark color. I created that with yellow ochre and ultramarine blue, and then I did gray it down because again, I don't want the brightest green I can make here. I need to keep that a little more dull, muted. And so now I'm going to go around and put my darkest greens in. Now I'm going to come back in with a next value, a lighter green. And again, this is muted. I don't want my brightest greens yet. I need to save the brightest greens till last when I want to put some highlights on. But now I come in with a lighter green. Maybe I could have gone a little darker on this green, but I wanted also contrast. And so I created this contrast. Now I start with this bush using this light green, but I have the contrast wrong here. I don't have the right color. I can get away with that up here in the tree areas. Again, putting in my light green. So I'm going to go around and put my light greens in. And I'm coming back in with an even lighter green now. And this has a little more saturation. It's got a little higher value, a little more brightness in it. Again, I want that contrast, and I'm thinking about the value and the contrast. I need contrast to separate these brighter leaves and foliage. And I also want to capture a little more vitality in the painting, so I haven't grayed this down as much as I did the previous colors. Again, not straight out of the tube yet. I don't want to do that till the last. If I'm going to use straight out of the tube, I want to save that to the end for special highlights and to create emphasis. Now it's easy for me to tell that the dirt on the trail isn't dark enough. So I'm going to come in with a dark value here. And it's going to be almost as dark as my dark green there, maybe a little darker, kind of between my darkest dark and my dark green, to create that nice, dark, deep, rich ground look. And then I'm going to start creating some contrast within that brown, and I'm using some burnt sienna. And here I'm using the burnt sienna right out of the tube, but because I laid enough of that brown down there, I'm able to mix this burnt sienna in and kind of dull it out a little bit as I put it down. That's going to break up my color a little bit, give me a rich trail. Because even though I don't have a composition that I'm really thinking is going to be of any value, and it's just an exercise, again, part of your contrast and values is about how you will paint something like a trail, like a dirt path. Now I'm going to come in with another value. It's lighter, and I can go right over the top of my dark dirt with this lighter value, create some contrast and create some vitality and movement in the soil. Now with that lighter color in, I do come in with some more burnt sienna to break up a couple of spots where maybe I got a little too heavy on the light, and add some nice texture to my dirt pathway. Again, all this is about value and contrast. The values and the contrast here. It's more important than the color in this exercise. I've done some of my leaves up in the upper right just to test out my colors. Now I'm going to start by putting in my lightest greenish color. And I'm going to put that in around the page. And I am using an impasto method, so I'm putting quite a bit of color on there. And now I'm coming back in with a slightly different green and creating some depth and movement to that as well. Again, it's all about contrast and values. It's important that the value is pretty bright right here, because that will be the brightest point in the painting, because it's kind of the focal point at the end of that trail. Now I'm coming back in with a slightly darker value, just lighter than my green that I had on the bush behind it. So I've created the illusion of a bush in front of another bush by altering my values. I go in here with a really nice rich dark green to create some dark value at the bottom of that bush, because at the bottom of your bushes is usually going to be dark because they're the most shaded area of the bush is at the bottom. And keep that in mind, that the bottom of the bush closest to the ground is going to be the darkest. So again, I'm using some greens here, and you can see that there's different values in the bush itself, but I'm being sensitive to the colors around it so that I create contrast as I do these colors. Contrast is going to separate things, as well as value is going to separate things, and contrast is in value, and contrast is also in the hue or the color. Now these are blocks or globulars of moss hanging off the tree, so I want to save a palish greenish color for those. Again, value and contrast. So I went with a light green, really grayed down. I don't want it to have any brightness in it at all. I will put bright highlights in later. But so I'm going to go around and fill in all the mossy spots on the trees. Then I'm going to use some of the greens that I created for other areas to put some highlights on that moss, just to bring some texture to it and create some highlights within there to make it a little more lively. Now, just because the moss is mainly this pale green doesn't mean I can't use that green in other places, but I can't use it in as large of a block as I can use it for highlights only, because I want this green to look different on purpose. So I don't want any of this green in any large places anywhere besides the moss, but I will incorporate it into other places in my painting. And now I'm going to come back in and put a dark green, a rich dark green over those blocked in areas that were the darkest darks. I'm using a dark green, and I'm using the impasto method of putting nice thick paint, because your paint thickness and your brush strokes also create contrast. And so since I enjoy impasto painting, I'm doing this exercise with impasto type painting methods. And so I'm going to bleed those edges together, kind of fade those edges in. I don't want any harsh edges here in this painting with this dark. So I'm going to scrub out those edges and bleed them into each other a little bit. Again, that's when you have your values set up well, you can do that and not lose the color. And I'm going to take that darker color and also put some highlights here and there around the board. Now I'm going to go in with a green and start blocking in, or I should say putting a first impasto layer on some of my brighter green leaves of the trees. Not as bright as the bush on the focal area on the trail, but still a darker green. Again, so while I'm putting this greens in, I can use some of that green from the focal area, just not have it be as big of a block as in the focal area, because I don't want to have it compete. But it doesn't mean I can't use the colors other places, just have to be sensitive to the amount of that color I put in and not creating large blocks of it that competes with its original purpose. So that's a good rule of thumb to keep in mind. Whatever color you have for a particular purpose, you should look for places to use it elsewhere, but don't use it in large blocks for two different purposes, because that'll confuse the viewer. They'll see that moss color or that bright bush color and they'll wonder, well, is that, what's that color mean now? It looks the same as that. So, but they're shaped different and they're in different locations. And so don't confuse your viewer by misusing their color. But it doesn't mean you can't use it for highlights and create synergy throughout your painting. So again, focused on contrast, I'm coming in with a little darker green. That's a little bit darker than the brighter green I was putting in. And now another green that's lighter, that's muted. It's not as bright as the yellowish green I have around, but you see I'm creating contrast. I'm using the values to create separations. And now I'm painting back in the darker spots in between these. Again, I want that brush strokes as well to create the contrast. So I'm coming back in with a dark color. So in this study, I often tell you when I'm painting my other paintings is, jump around the painting. Don't get stuck at one place too long. Paint something and then walk away from it, move to another place on your painting and see how it looks. See, now here I'm coming in with another green. This is kind of a brownish green that I put in there. And now I'm blending the edges of those colors together. I don't want harsh edges. This is a forest where things, the deep dark greens, are subtle. But in my painting, again, I'm making it a little more obvious, but being sensitive not to create too much large separation and contrast in color, because I want to create a flow through the painting. Again, I start in with another green. You can see it's a slightly different hue. It's muted as well, grayed out some. It's not a bright green, but it has contrast. It has value that settles in with the others. You have to be sensitive not to go with a really bright, rich color that's out of place. And that can happen and make your paintings look cartoonish if you go and jump around too much with your values, so that you get a lot of brights all over the place and darks and mixing them all up. You want to be aware of that. And that's why this is a good exercise. Going in here now, you see that little bit of contrast I'm creating with a slightly brighter green, a little more value to it. It's got a less grayed out. It creates contrast, and it's a subtle contrast. And so the subtle contrasts in your colors, in your blocks, create some realism. Because when you look at a tree, for instance, it's green, right? But you look at it, and the longer you look at it and study it, the more variations of green you can find, from bright greens that's maybe are almost white where the sun's hitting them, to deep dark black greens in the shadows, and everything in between. It's just a question of how much of each is there, and what's the dominant color, and what will you use to bring in highlights. So I'm bouncing around. Now I'm going to a brighter green up in the upper left-hand corner, where it's getting a little more sunlight. It's not down in the deep, dark pits of the forest. It's up there where the sun can hit it. Moving around my painting, I'm putting some nice, deep, dark, rich, dark color in the painting. And while I'm moving around, maybe you noticed I got a little more highlights in some areas where I'm taking colors that are slightly different values and creating highlights on them. So I can, again, I don't want the highlights to be too drastic. So I'll use a color of green that's close in value. See, like that, it's not too drastic now. I've broken up the harsh edges and created a transition between those colors that feels smooth. I say smooth, even though it doesn't look smooth, but the color transitions more smoothly, even if the brush strokes create contrast in the way they flow. Now I've gone with a really deep, dark color here. Again, burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. And I think I might have even added some ivory black to make sure that was really nice and dark. And I started at the bottom right-hand corner. But as I get to the edges of that, I lighten it up a little bit. I want to create a slight change in the value so it's not one big giant block of dark. And so I fade those into each other, going both ways into the bush. Now I can take that dark and add some little specks of dark around. Again, creating contrast, creating movement within the foliage. You'll notice various areas where I've taken that really dark, deep, rich color and put it in. Um, I'm being somewhat aggressive with it in some places. I want to create more contrast, create a deeper, dark sense of the forest there. And so I'm going to go into some of my darker areas and add that dark color in. Again, that creates contrast and, uh, you know, gives it a feeling of depth in the forest, a deep forest. Not just a few bushes, but a depth to it. Having utilized that deep dark color around the painting, I've also now going to use that on that bush in the bottom off center in front of that log that's laying there. That deep, dark, rich color and is all the way to the foreground, the front of the foreground, so I can get away with it. I don't want people to, again, that creates depth. That creates depth in that it's so dark and rich that it's going to push everything behind it a little bit. So now continue just using these same colors I've already used elsewhere and just bouncing around my painting, creating contrast and depth and vitality in my painting. Again, no new color mixing, just a very limited selection of colors that I've already got. Now the tree, I'm going to come in with a dark brown. It's really based on that dark green. I think I added some burnt sienna to that dark green to create a brown. And once I get the fallen log painted in with that color, I'm going to come in with some lighter browns. I use a little titanium white to lighten it up. And I'm going to bring in and create some highlights and some texture to create the illusion of bark. And then a darker color for the dark side of the log and then a lighter color to create, again, more contrast within the log. I think I even use a light green there on the log. And then I can move to the other trees and repeat this process. Dark brown, lighter browns, and the dark to create shadows. And I can go back and touch up the other trees as I move from tree to tree. Again, this is created with a contrast of the colors and the values of those colors. And I find an opportunity to go back to the trail. I'm actually going to use some burnt sienna straight out of the tube here and bring some of that really dark color to put a little shadow next to that bush and create a nice deep dark area into the trail itself. I'm going to create some flow from the dark bush into the trail, creating contrast again and texture. Through this process, I continually bounced around the painting, putting in some other colors and highlights. Now I'm going to go back in and do the sky. I put it in pastel sky, a nice kind of greenish blue color. And I can cut back into my trees and paint over and put some sky holes in. And then I go back to my trail and start adding some more burnt sienna, and I want to build that trail out and make it look a little richer and nicer and more established. Again, it's all about contrast and values, using a little darker colors here and there and some lighter colors to create depth and movement. Again, coming in with a really nice light green on that trunk of that fallen log to create contrast. And I can apply that same color to my other trees too. And then I can take some of that blue I use in the sky and put it on the trees to bring some synergy to the painting and create some more contrast and value shifts to create some more life in the tree trunks themselves. That even works in small amounts to put a little bit on the trail to create, again, more contrast and viability and liveliness and movement. And then you can continue the process just like you did before, taking the colors you've already used, nothing new, no new colors, and going around your painting and creating more movement in your colors, more liveliness, realism with the breaking up some of the solid colors and shapes with lighter versions or darker versions, thinking about contrast, thinking about values and how you can bring some life to it and create some flow. So again, this is an exercise in value and contrast using a lot of greens because I think that's a great exercise, greens, because that's one of the colors in nature that we're going to battle with as painters to create contrast and value shifts within our paintings when it's a lot of greens. And this exercise of using all these greens to create separation, to create different objects. And that's how you have to think when you're putting your compositions together in greeneries, is just how do I shift it. Now, this is nothing you're going to put on your wall. It's just a great exercise. So I hope you try this exercise out, and I hope you found some value in it. This is the Big Toad, and I am out.